Welcome to today's Explainer. We are taking a deep dive right now into an absolutely incredible piece of source material that, quite honestly, completely reframes our baseline understanding of the modern workplace. We're looking at the principles of a proactive safety culture. And what really stood out to me in this text is how it completely moves beyond your standard, boring operational metrics. It doesn't treat workplace safety like some tedious compliance task. Instead, it views it as this incredibly empowering, dynamic, cultural shift. We're unpacking a transformation that doesn't just protect people, though it obviously does that, but fundamentally changes how a team operates, communicates, and thrives together. To really grasp this, I want you to visualize something for a second. Just be totally honest with yourself. What actually happens when supervision vanishes? Picture a team you've managed, or maybe just worked with in the past. The manager steps off the warehouse floor, the supervisor leaves the construction site, or the director just logs off for the day. Does the standard of work remain exactly the same? Do people still follow the protocols to the letter, or do things kind of slip? Do corners get cut simply because nobody's actively watching? Well, your honest answer to that question reveals the absolute baseline of your organization's true culture. Because if safety practices just vanish the second management walks out the door, you don't actually have a safety culture. You just have a system of temporary compliance. And that realization brilliantly illustrates our source's core definition. True safety culture is the collective drive to act correctly even when supervision is absent. What is so fascinating about this framing is the heavy emphasis on that word collective. It's an internal drive. It describes this shared psychological state among the entire workforce, where doing things the safe way, the right way, is literally just how things are done around here. It relies entirely on an internal compass shared by the team, rather than the external pressure of a manager breathing down someone's neck. And really, that is the gold standard we're exploring today. But as you probably know, getting to that standard is notoriously difficult because as the text explores, so many organizations fall right into what's called the traditional management trap. Historically, management has treated safety as essentially a policing mechanism. It sets up this adversarial dynamic where management acts as the strict enforcer and the employees are treated as these potential rule breakers who need to be monitored constantly. We've all seen it, right? This dynamic is incredibly common, but as our source material explains, it is fundamentally counterproductive to genuinely keeping people safe. So we really need to understand exactly why this traditional approach fails so badly. The text breaks it down into 3 highly destructive outcomes. First, it punishes mistakes. Second, it completely ignores positive contributions. And ultimately, it fosters a climate of fear. Think about how this actually plays out in the real world. If an employee makes an honest error, or maybe they flag a near miss, and the immediate response from management is a harsh punishment or a formal write-up, what's going to happen next time? They're going to hide the mistake. They will sweep that hazard right under the rug. By adopting a punitive tick box approach that only looks for what people are doing wrong, while totally ignoring the folks who are proactively doing things right, organizations actively breed a climate of fear. And fear, my friends, is the absolute enemy of transparency. All of this builds into a massive paradigm shift demanded by the source text. We have to move from a climate of fear to genuine care. It's a complete 180. A climate of fear relies on threats, hiding data, and top-down dictation. Genuine care, on the other hand, is built entirely on trust, transparency, and mutual respect. The source text strongly argues that if a safety program isn't rooted in genuine care for the well-being of the actual human beings doing the work, it will inevitably default right back to that climate of fear. We have got to move away from just managing liability and move toward a sincere commitment that absolutely everyone goes home to their family in the exact same condition they arrived. Okay, so how is this massive cultural pivot actually achieved? Well, according to the text, it has to start at the very top. Leadership must model ideal behavior. You simply cannot delegate a cultural shift to the HR department or the safety officer. It just won't work. If the CEO or the site manager walks onto the floor without their personal protective equipment because they're, just popping in for a second, the entire culture is instantly undermined. The workforce watches absolutely everything leadership does. If leaders cut corners, the staff is going to cut corners. The energy and the commitment to genuine care have to be visibly, consistently, and authentically demonstrated by the people in charge every single day. And the material gets very specific on how leaders must act to drive this forward. It's essentially a 2-pronged approach. First, as we just discussed, they absolutely must model the ideal behavior themselves. Second, and honestly, this is incredibly powerful, they must publicly acknowledge employees who prioritize well-being. Remember that traditional trap we talked about, the one of only punishing mistakes? Well, this is the exact antidote to that. When a leader publicly praises an employee who stops a production line because they noticed a hazard, it sends an absolute shockwave through the company. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the organization actually values well-being over immediate short-term production quotas. That kind of positive reinforcement is the fastest way to replace fear with proactive care. And here's the beautiful thing: when leadership gets this right, when they actually model the behavior and reward the right priorities, the culture shifts dramatically. Suddenly, every single staff member begins to take ownership of hazards. Safety is no longer just the safety manager's headache, it becomes everybody's job. If there's a spill on the floor, an employee doesn't just walk past it and assume somebody else is going to clean it up. They take personal ownership. They stop, they secure the area, and they handle it because they feel a deep sense of responsibility to their environment and to their colleagues. This level of universal ownership is the ultimate hallmark of a mature, proactive culture. The source text points out a fascinating benchmark right here. It says a robust culture is achieved when employees are, and I quote, empowered to correct their peers. Let that sink in for a second. That is the ultimate test of your environment. It is one thing for a manager to correct an employee, sure, but it is an entirely different level of trust when a junior worker feels completely safe, confident, and empowered to tap a 20-year veteran colleague on the shoulder and say, hey, you forgot to lock out that machine. And for that veteran colleague to actually say thank you instead of getting defensive. When peer-to-peer correction happens naturally and respectfully without management ever having to step in, you know you have achieved something truly special. Now, of course, just wishing for this environment isn't going to make it happen out of nowhere. We need a builder's blueprint, and the source text provides exactly that with 3 highly actionable steps. Step 1, deploy targeted surveys. You have got to understand the current reality on the ground by anonymously asking your workforce what they are actually seeing and feeling. Step 2, provide consistent training. Education isn't just a one-time onboarding video you watch on your first day. It requires ongoing, engaging communication that reminds everyone why these protocols actually matter. And step 3, which is perhaps the most vital, involve the workforce in goal setting. Please don't just dictate goals from a boardroom. Sit down with the people actually doing the work, the ones exposed to the hazards every day, and build those goals with them. So, this brings us to one final, deeply provocative question based on everything we've unpacked today. I want you to look at your own organization or the organizations you interact with and ask yourself honestly, is safety a shared value or is it just paperwork? Because if it's just paperwork, you are relying entirely on luck and a climate of fear. And as our source material so clearly proves, that is a traditional management trap just waiting to spring. But if you can make it a shared value by modeling behavior, acknowledging positive actions, and empowering peers to actually protect one another, you don't just create a safer workplace, you create a unified, empowered culture where people genuinely care about one another. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this challenges you to look at your own environment in a whole new light.